Hi everyone, my name's Chris, and I'm going to talk to you about how to better onboard your new users. First of all, I recently got promoted to unemployed. I got my last job from this meetup. I would love to get another one from this meetup. If you go to christhrasher.com, which is on all my slides, that'll take you to my open source programming portfolio where you can find a lot of information about me. Frankly, if you read through my GitHub contributions, that's probably more useful than even interviewing me. So that's easy. Definitely recommend you go do that. I've got a lot of stuff on there that really will tell you a lot about what kind of developer I am, including what I'm about to go talk about. I also have a post in the jobs channel of the Discord server. So I do a lot of work with programmers who are often teenagers. So these are often people who are doing their first serious programming project. So they don't have really any context for what it's like to get started doing any sort of non-trivial programming project, anything more serious than some sort of online co-editor, P5.js, something like that. The library that I happen to work on is often used for making video games. So as you can imagine, a lot of teenagers like to get into programming by making their own video games. So it attracts a lot of them. So when they're trying to get set up with this library, they're going to try a lot of things, way more things than you could ever imagine them trying. They often reach for any YouTube video they can find. That's a really, really popular place for new programmers to go look for help. You might not like making videos. I know that it's definitely expensive. They're hard to update, but that is the truth. If you're looking for how to be welcoming to new programmers, YouTube is the #1 place to be. Again, difficult, video is hard, but that is where they go. But often they just can't get set up with the project. They can't get anything building, they can't get anything running, and it really sucks when they give up, because if you're trying to get into programming, we want more people to get into programming. I think it's a great thing to do. And it sucks when these barriers dealing with build tools and other stuff like that is the reason why they just give up and go try something else. So what do they need? So we really need to minimize the time between them saying, I want to make, in this case, some sort of game, and the time to having something running. So that's not having their game done. That's having a window on the screen with something on there, proving that, yes, I can actually write code, and like here's a visual confirmation that something is running. Those early successes are really important to keep them motivated. If they have no success after a day or so, that's where they start to give up. But if they can have success after an hour, that's great. Maybe they're going to have another 2 or 3 days of like no real progress. But they had that early success, and that can be really motivating. So that's why I care about that. There's a lot of nuances to building code and getting any non-trivial program up and running. I think a lot of us are aware of that. There's a lot of nuances that you want to explain after that first success. I know it can be tempting to say like, oh, here's 10 pages that you need to understand before you get started. You should skip as much of that as possible. So the goal of what I'm going to talk about is you want to get to that early success as soon as possible. You can't dictate anything else about their environment. They're going to use whatever OS, compiler, IDE they want. You might say, you really shouldn't use that. You should use this other thing. The reality is new programmers are going to use whatever they happen to pick first. And you just kind of have to work with that. Otherwise, they're going to go elsewhere and not use your library. So what do we do? So I'm a maintainer for a multimedia library called SFML. It's been around for a long time, but I've been a maintainer for about the past 2 years. Very often used to make video games. You can do other things, but that's its main purpose. So what we've done here is I'd recommend you go to this right here, the CMake SFML project on GitHub. If you open that up, this is going to be a GitHub template project, which if you're not familiar, this is a type of GitHub project, type of GitHub repo, which has some like special UI elements, which allow you to very easily make a fork of that. So it's more complicated than just forking it. Ultimately, that's kind of what it is. But it has closer ties to the thing that you forked it from. GitHub has good information about what template projects are and how to use them. One of the reasons I like to do this is that if you're getting into programming, you might not think to use source control, and a lot of people don't, and that's kind of a bummer. Obviously, you're going to lose your code, you're going to lose your project, you lose your progress, but even sharing code when is very important. So when you're getting started programming, it's very important that you have a way to share what you've done with other people. And if you already have a remote GitHub project, then you can just link to that. And that's much easier than screenshots. People take pictures with their phone of their computer screen and share that on Discord. That's not the best way. There's a lot of not great ways to share your code. But right off the bat, we're encouraging good habits for sharing code. And the other big thing, and I'll get more into the details later, is that the library is downloaded via CMake's fetch content module. There's a lot to say about that, but the important thing here is that telling users how to manually clone, build, and install a repo is too much work. Telling them to use a package manager often too much work. Telling them to go download specific precompiled binaries from the web, put them in a specific place, and then change a bunch of IDE settings to point to those correct precompiled binaries that hopefully have an ABI that matches your compiler. That's a lot. That's really easy to go wrong, and a lot of users are not going to bother doing that.
5 minutes. All right, don't keep going.
I'm going to use the full 10 if you're going to give it to us. And this template also includes a cross-platform GitHub Actions CI pipeline. Another thing that new programmers definitely aren't going to use is learn how to set up CI. So that's like yet another thing that you can do when you provide them with a template project. It's just already there. As long as they click the button to enable GitHub Actions for their fork, they're going to get a whole CI pipeline, which I think is really cool. So does it work? Yes. There's been a really great history of the stars increasing. I'm going to call that exponential growth. Lot of successful users. Hundreds of people have been able to use it that possibly might otherwise have not bothered using the library. Some proportion of them might have given up on programming if not for this. So it makes you really happy to see this, to know that there's a lot of new users who are getting to make video games for the first time, and I get to make that a lot easier for them. So just to dig into the details for a minute, because a lot of the fun of this are in the details of getting it right. This is basically it right here. There's a little bit of boilerplate. Some of it is specific to this library that you can ignore, like those 3rd and 4th lines, but this is most of it right here. You just install the library for them, or I should say build. You just download and build it for them. And then here you have one source file that makes an application, and you link the library to that. And it's really simple. And when you look at this, there's really not that much to show, but the thing is, if you've never built a compiled program before, none of this makes any sense to you. But the thing is, you don't have to know how this works, because the beauty of CMake projects is that every IDE is going to support them. So the README that has all the instructions for how to get started basically just says, do you have Visual Studio? Here's a link to how to open CMake projects in that. Do you have Visual Studio Code, Qt Creator, CLion? The most common IDEs are there. You just say, point to the existing documentation for a CMake project, and then that's it. This works on any IDE, any OS, any compiler. And it skips so much of the stuff that you don't want new programmers to have to deal with. You don't want to have to show them why these things matter. You just want to do it for them. And if you can do it, then they're much more likely to have that early success that I think is really important if you want them to actually stick with it, stick with programming, that is. So this has been great. If you have a library that you want more if you want more users, particularly new programmers to use, I highly recommend something like this. It's been wonderful. Can't recommend it enough. Thank you.